Well, good afternoon. It's the afternoon, and I'm going to start my writing series today. So I'm going to talk about writing fiction as opposed to writing nonfiction, and a few things I think to get you started. So you want to write a novel, or maybe not. Maybe you want to write nonfiction. There is people say one is easier than the other, and I think um, before I started writing fiction, I thought fiction would be easier than nonfiction because fiction is made up. So you can just kind of like write whatever you want. That'd be easy. With nonfiction, you have to do research and get all your facts straight. And so I figured, fiction's got to be easier because you just kind of go with the flow and write whatever you want. The problem is that fiction is all made up, and that brings a whole other host of issues to a story. Your story has to have internal integrity. It has to make sense, and it also, for a novel, I mean, to make up a whole novel, to make up a 200, 300 page story is not as easy as you think, because every time you write a sentence, you could be getting yourself off target. So you have to be very vigilant about your story and have a critical eye. Maybe not when you start out, but certainly at some point during the editing process, you have to develop a critical eye for that. So in both cases, fiction and nonfiction, there's research involved, which I never thought there would be research in a fiction book, but there is a lot of research in a fiction book because you have characters that live in a certain place. You have to make it sound realistic. You have characters that do a certain type of job. You need to do research on that. You have characters that, if you write murder mysteries, then you have to know a lot about police procedural stuff, and you have to know about bodies and murder. And if you write any of your genre stuff, like other things like science fiction, you have to be world building. So there is a lot of research involved with fiction as well as nonfiction. And the thing about fiction versus nonfiction, with nonfiction, it's just a matter of getting the information and putting it together, arranging the information in a cohesive book or piece of work. Where because not a fiction is so malleable and so changeable, it's a lot more difficult to get your arms around it, to keep it going, and for it to make sense. So fiction writers actually, I mean, some people are just very talented at writing fiction, but there is still research involved, and there's still a critical thinking involved, and just the sheer length of a novel is really quite daunting. So, that aside, so you want to write a novel, and one of the things I tell students of mine in my classes is there's three things that help me. Now, everyone learns at their own rate how to write a novel and how to keep going with a novel. But for me, I'll tell you what worked for me. There were three things, or were there more than three things? Let me think. Well, the first thing is you have to know how to write, and that means you have to know your grammar. Have to know all the pieces of a novel. Like when you're working on a car engine, you have to know what a carburetor is. You have to know where what the computer does. You have to know about the starter and the battery and all this stuff. Well, same thing with fiction writing. You have to know about point of view. You have to know about tense. You have to know about characterization. You have to know what backstory is, what dialogue is, and you have to develop a certain level of knowledge in all those aspects of writing a fiction book. Some people, it seems like to me, a lot of people have certain strengths in certain areas. And those are your strengths that you're capitalizing on. Some people are better at plotting. Some people are better at world building. Some people are better at point of view. Some people write fast. Some people write slow. There's a lot of variability. But you have to have a working knowledge, also of grammar, of pacing. There's a lot of things involved with writing a novel that you have to develop a certain level of competency. Now, one of the things I did that was very helpful, and I would suggest it to anyone who is thinking of writing a novel, hasn't written a novel yet, or is thinking about it, or is stuck writing a novel, is to take a book, a novel that you like, that is your favorite novel, whatever novel that is. It could be, of course, it could be anyone, depending on who you are and what you like to read. Take your favorite novel and start writing it out longhand. Not from the beginning to the end, just open the book and start writing it out longhand. I did this with Margaret Atwood's Robber Bride, and it made me pay attention to how she put words on the page. A very simple thing to do. I didn't write the whole book. I wrote like 5 pages, somewhere in the middle of her story. And I just wrote it longhand, and I paid particular attention to the sentence structure, to the words she used, to what was interesting about what she was writing, what kept me reading, and that was very helpful. So I call that deconstructing a story. Not my story, but someone else, someone who I respected as a writer. So I did that with Margaret Atwood. The second thing I did was I had an amount that I would write. It either could be a timed amount or a page amount that I would write every day. That really keeps you going because it's so easy to just let it fall by the wayside. And it doesn't have to be a lot. Most recently, what I do now is I write an hour a day. Just an hour a day. I write up usually in the morning, but it doesn't have to be in the morning. I write 1 hour a day, which is very doable. And sometimes I even don't even write the full hour. I write 20 minutes here and then 40 minutes later. And that keeps me going, just that little bit. Now, some people need to write a lot more than that, and that's fine. But you have to find your own way so writing will become part of your day. And that's very helpful to have that happen. So, and it could be a word count that you do every day, or it could be an amount of time that you do every day. I do an hour, and so it doesn't really matter how much I write. I do an hour a day, and it doesn't even have to be 1 full hour. It could be split up during the day. That was the second thing I did. The third thing I did that helped me a lot writing was joining a writer's group. Now, depends on where you live. You could start a writer's group, or you could join an existing writer's group, and that will be very helpful. There's also writer groups online that you can join, and there's also the groups that you can start yourself. If you're in a small town or anywhere you are, if you want to go to the local library and start a writer's group, that would be great. It seems to me the most successful times I've had with writers groups was a small group of dedicated writers, and we met usually twice a month. And we would bring material, pass it, and then we would read it during the 2 weeks, then we'd come back and critique it. So writers groups are really important too. The fourth thing that I didn't say, I didn't mention, but there are books on writing. There's lots of books on writing, and some are very enjoyable. But there's one book I wanted to mention before I go any further, before I forget mentioning it, and that's Jack Bickham's, Bickham, Scene and Structure. That's a fabulous book. He was a creative writer, teacher, University of Iowa maybe, or Idaho. I'm not sure. He's no longer with us. I think he died. The book is put out by Writer's Digest, and it talks about what a story is, and it talks about the parts of the story. And that book was extremely helpful for me, and I've recommended it to many other people who have found it likewise very, very helpful. The Writer's Digest has great books on writing. They have books on mysteries, and they have books on settings and point of view. They really hone in on certain topics that are terrific. So this is my first video about writing fiction and my thoughts about writing fiction. If you are interested in writing fiction, advice is free here. So hope you enjoyed it. I will be back with more information on writing fiction, writing the great American novel, or writing a short story, or writing a novella. All of those are things that I've done. Hey, thanks for watching. Have a great day.